By the way, this isn't all of the stuff. I'm just hitting the highlights.
We traveled down to Peru, and this is Dr. Javier Cabrera, who was 20 years head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima, retired to be cultural anthropologist in Inca, ancestor of the conquistadors, has a big 300-year-old castle there on the town square, and has a collection of Inca burial stones that begun to be made by his father back in the 30s. He's continued that collection. These are stones that are buried with in the tombs with the Incas, and they have scenes carved over them, most of them. He has a collection now of over 11,000 of these burial stones. About a third of them are the most disgusting pornography you've ever seen, but about a third of them have dinosaurs on them. Here is one in place in the tomb, but looking at a close-up of these stones, you can see the rather artistic rendition of the dinosaur. Interestingly, this one has the dermal frills on its back. When Mr. Sinclair did his sign with the dinosaur, he didn't know that it had frills on its back, but they did it right. This was written up in Geology magazine in 1992 for the first time, and we found them well preserved. But there are thousands of these stones. This is one of the larger ones. Again, rather artistically rendered. Looking at a close-up, you can see the dinosaur in the upper right-hand corner with the man foot in his mouth. All shapes and sizes and types of stones and styles of rendering, certainly not done by the same individual. Some of them are almost oriental looking, and some of them rather literal looking. Here's one with a number of different species on it, but thousands of them. We have a number of others who have collected as well. We have a collection at the Aeronautical Museum in Lima. There were hundreds here. There are 40 that are left. They've been raided, I think sold maybe illegally. But you can still see the stones, some of the ones that are not as elaborate and beautiful as in the Cabrera collection, but obviously recognizable. Still in the National Aeronautical Museum, there's also a display in the Naval Museum, and at least 2 other museums that I know of in Peru. Some of them are still being excavated. This was one that was excavated in 2006 that is in the artifact room. It has 2 dinosaurs on it. Slightly different type stone from Cabrera's, raised instead of incised, but still the same general picture. Also in the tombs you find burial cloths with the same kind of motif there. Obviously, the big claws and the teeth representing dinosaurs. You see it on their pottery. That's relatively easy to date. These are dated at about 2,500 years ago. These are the mochi pots. The style is well known and documented and represented in the national museums. This one's in the National Museum in Lima. It says circa 2,500 years ago. Up in northern Peru, you have a good deal of gold in some of the ruins and tombs. This is a death mask, but look on either side of the face. Again, the dermal frills across the back, the tail curling up over, and the huge teeth. These people were seeing dinosaurs 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Now, we're told that we've known what dinosaurs look like for maybe, well, the first ones found in 1820, we didn't know what they looked like very well. The restorations were silly. After the turn of the century, early 1900s, we got a fair idea, and really not an excellent idea. And, well, 1992, we learned the Brontosaurus type had frills on its back. These people didn't show a gradation in learning. They got it right from the start. Likewise in Mexico, we've made a number of trips there in Central Highlands near Acambaro in the state of Guanajuato. Dr. Swift and I have been down there a number of times investigating. It took that many times to get through all the bureaucracy. When we got there, they were being hidden in the back of the police department. But it was a collection made by Waldemar Julsrud back in the early 1900s. of some 30,000 ceramic figurines, about 10% of which are of dinosaurs, but a wide range of animals and creatures. Some of the Brontosaurus type were standing up. We didn't know that until recently. Hawker's book, Dinosaur Heresies, published in '86, was really the first one who suggested that. And then, of course, Spielberg convinced us all they stood up. But this is exactly the way they're rendered by the artist, and these date to well before the time of Christ from several sources. Again, there are thousands of them, and the styles indicate far more than one artist. One of the professors from the University of Texas at Arlington, who is an art professor, said there were at least 100 different artists represented in the collection, would be his estimate. This is my wife's favorite. Obviously, if you've got one that looks like a dinosaur, a man did it, but sewing them together is interesting. Man and dinosaur obviously live together. You pick up any of the dinosaur books today, and how does it start out? Millions and millions of years ago. And then the second paragraph says, no man ever saw a dinosaur. And that's just like, you can't write a dinosaur book unless you start that way. It ain't so.
It's just crazy. This is just wild. You don't see this anywhere in the educational system. You don't see this in the media, but this coexistence with man and dinosaurs living together, this is crazy. I mean, I know that's what the Bible says. Okay, I know that's what it says, but come on, man, you think if it's true, we'd at least find some physical evidence of this coexistence, right? Doug, you're on the ball, and guess what? We do. As we're going to see, folks, throughout our study, the other side is trying their best to destroy the evidence. And the first physical evidence we see, folks, we see actual evidence that man and dinosaurs really did live together, is they find human remains, folks, with the dinosaurs. How do you explain that one? Let's take a look at the actual evidence.
Richard Dawkins describes the implications. We should be very surprised, for example, to find humans appearing in the record before mammals are supposed to have evolved. If a single well-verified mammal skull were to turn up in 500 million-year-old rocks, our whole modern theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. We have found that kind of thing rather commonly. One very obvious and dramatic example is near LaSalle, Utah, where perfectly modern human skeletons replaced with malachite are found in a layer that's also found at Dinosaur National Monument, one that is known for its dinosaurs, in the Dakota sandstone. So the key phrase in his statement is, if a well-verified mammal skull. Well, we went back to the site to see if we could well verify, and it's a part of an open pit copper mine just about 20 miles south of Moab, and where you see the backhoe here is where the skeletons were found. Here's one of them still in the rock. This is 50 feet down in the Dakota sandstone. And you see in the lower right-hand corner the pelvis, the knee up near the top, the foot over in the lower left. This one is articulated, or together as in life. Most of them are just bones piled together, as is the case here. Some of these look like they go together. They really don't. They're just piled together. This is one that had been out of the rock for about 5 minutes when we washed it off there with a canteen and held it up for the picture. It's replaced with malachite, which obviously shows it's not a recent burial. It contains no collagen. That typically takes about 1,000 years to dissipate. And so this is an excellent turvy fossil. I think there's as much verification as you could ever find. And remember then what Dawkins says, if you can well verify it, his conclusion is evolution would be utterly destroyed. I think that's exactly what's happened.
Literally dozens of places throughout South America that demonstrate amazing technology, as well as the coexistence of humans and dinosaurs, which of course evolutionists cannot tolerate. We see pictured here Dr. Javier Cabrera, who was 20 years head of the Department of Medicine at the University of Lima, with his hand behind a fossil skull embedded in a tertiary boulder, with a modern skull in the foreground for scale. Now, being head of the Department of Medicine, he knows what a human skull looks like. He brought that there for comparison. and brought this to our attention. He says in this tertiary boulder, which is very close to, that's the next layer above the dinosaurs, some 60 million years ago, we've got a human skull. Well, we came down to investigate that, and by the time we had gotten there, it had been sabotaged. Actually, he had made some comments to reporters. They had mentioned it in the newspaper, and someone destroyed it. And here you can see the hole where that skull was. It was bashed and completely removed.
Now, wait a second, Lillian. That smells like a conspiracy. Why in... You preach it, I'll get a microphone on you. Why in the world would somebody bash in and destroy that evidence? I mean, just because it disagrees with something you believe in, why would you want to go and destroy it? Unless it's, of course, obvious, folks, that it undermines and destroys your whole theory, yes, evolution, and gives credence to the biblical account that, you know what, it really looks like man and dinosaurs did live together. That's my particular theory, but come on, man, these people wouldn't do that, would they? Folks, I'm telling you, there's a huge mega cover-up going on. And they're not just keeping it from you and I, they're trying their fastest to destroy it as fast as God brings it up. But that's not all, folks. The second evidence, you talk about how do you get around this one, that man and dinosaurs really did live together, is from human tracks where dinosaurs belong. This is amazing, folks. I mean, if they really did live together and there really was a coexistence that was peaceful, then you'd expect to find them walking side by side, wouldn't you? Well, hey, shocker, folks, that's exactly what we find. Take a look at this one. How do you explain this one away?
Several of you here have traveled with us down to Dinosaur Valley State Park and seen the footprints there. This is where the Paluxy River runs through the park, and there are just all kinds of dinosaur tracks all over the place down there. They were made famous back in the 40s by Roland T. Byrd, who published a number of articles, and we can see the big sauropod-like elephant tracks almost, and then the three-toed theropods. But in addition to tracks like this, we also have tracks that look like this. Wonder what that could be. I was somewhat intimidated by the objection because it was just almost too good to be true, and so we looked around for some that weren't quite so good and found some as well. Here's one in the lower right-hand corner that was identified by the Dallas Crime Lab as a human footprint. By the same criteria, they identify footprints at a crime scene, along with dinosaur tracks that had just been excavated. And some of the tracks that we found were very, very human-like. But the explanation was either that this is erosion or they were carved. It has to be one or the other. So we got a new set of objections. Instead of falling down a crack or intrusionally buried, now then it's erosion or carved. Well, Stan Taylor decided to test some of these ideas back in the early 70s, taking a bulldozer, a backhoe, and following a trail of two tracks that were seen there in the river that came out of the riverbank. Well, they're alternating layers of clay and limestone and clay and limestone, about 6 feet of them there. And if he removes that and these tracks continue back up under the bank, what would that say about the idea they'd been carved? That'd pretty well rip it, wouldn't it? He did, and yes, found 9 more tracks, for a total of 11, in a right-left pattern, some of them very clear and obvious with the mud push-up around it that you can see here, again arguing against the erosion factor. The one that really persuaded me, and I was trying to play the devil's advocate, is there some way that this could be explained, was this track. And you have to, and this, we extended that 11 track series to 14. This was one in the extension. You have to look at this a minute to really see it. As we highlight this area, you can see the dinosaur portion of it. It's about 25 inches long, but look what is in the middle of it, with all 5 toes and instep and heel. But this one is perfect. Several were saying, well, maybe it's erosion. Others were saying maybe it's carved. And when you get both, you know it's right in the middle and is exactly as good as it can get. We made a presentation of this at a national science meeting up in Tennessee. Glenn Kuban was there, who won Humanist of the Year for explaining these away. He was on the plane the next morning and in the river that afternoon with a long iron pole. And we got several calls saying he's out there with an iron pole, and got out there, and by the time we got there, it looked like this. It had just been beaten to pieces. The typical thing they say, just predict it. Well, you need more evidence. You can always say that. You need more evidence, and they do. And so in 2000, with the drought in this area, we noticed that this trail that's coming across it here, we could see more of it because the water had gone down. And so we decided to pump the river dry. And so we got quite a few pumps and 30 or 40 people down there pretty regularly for over a 3-month period. And with a lot of work, a lot of shovels, a lot of movement of dirt and watering a lot of farmers' fields on either side of the river, we pumped it dry and followed that trail and exposed the longest consecutive dinosaur trail on the American continent. 154 dinosaur tracks, over 500 feet long, and they're not only the longest trail, but they may be the clearest and most spectacular trail. The sharp detail is just awesome. When you go up ahead, it crosses this trail of human tracks that are very consistent in length, right-left pattern, all 5 toes, instep and heel. Then we presented that, and guess what they said then? Well, you need more evidence. And, okay, let's try the platform up ahead this time. And we moved ahead, and this platform we had to go down 3 or 4 layers till we got to the print layer, and sure enough, there's about 100 dinosaur tracks on this platform with 15 human tracks going right through the middle of it. Different individual. This one was consistently about 10 inches, but the right-left pattern is obvious. And we look at a close-up here of the center, and we see 2 tracks that are slightly raised, like the dinosaur footprints, but you can see that they match on either side. But the one on the right looks like something stepped in the back of it, doesn't it? And it's depressed. It's not raised. It came along after the infill had filled in the other tracks. Looking at a close-up of the one on the right, we'll see there is that duck-shaped dinosaur track that matches the one next to it perfectly, but again, the depressed track within it is just perfect. And if we had enough dark, you could actually count the knuckles and the toes here. And that's in a sequence of 15 in a right-left pattern. Okay, want some more evidence? It just keeps piling up, and they keep evading. If you want to draw a cartoon, I think the reality would be more like this. In the throes of a catastrophic flood, as they were trying to escape, they were running, and these were the ones that missed the boat.
Sure seems to fit the evidence, doesn't it?
What were the dragons? Were they just myths? Were they just stories that people made up? What was Beowulf up to? Or what was St. George up to? What were they fighting? Was it just stories made up to tell around the fire? Or were they actually fighting real animals? Did these people actually kill the last of the dinosaurs? Because remember, the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1842 by a gentleman called Richard Owen, who founded the Natural History Museum, I believe, one of the history museums in London. And he coined the term dinosaur to describe these fossils that they were digging up, huge animals which were unlike anything that we see today. So, before, what were they called? Well, they were probably called dragons. Okay, let's have some evidence. Let's talk about a bit of evidence for dinosaurs actually being around for George and Beowulf and other people like him to go and...
Listen to this. Of their own camp, J.M. Good, T.E. White, and G.F. Stucker said, quote, "These are some, that's just some of them, folks, of the theories that have been advanced to explain away the sudden extinction of the dinosaurs throughout the world. Each theory will explain the death of some of the dinosaurs in some places, but attempts to apply any of them or combinations of them to worldwide extinction have what? Their own camp. It's failed, okay? He said this dinosaur story is like a mystery thriller with the last pages torn out. That is true, and the paleontologist knows it. He also knows the riddle will probably never be solved. Or will it? What if you looked in the one book that doesn't have the pages torn out, called the Bible, and why, by cracky, you'll see the answer was there the whole time. It was a flood. A worldwide flood caused the sudden disappearance of the dinosaurs. Give me a break. Could it really be that simple and obvious? Yeah. But that's right, folks. I'm here to help you out. For those of you who need even more proof that, listen, here's the premise. A recent worldwide flood really did wipe out all the dinosaurs on the planet. Most of them anyway. We'll get to that later. We got proof. Check this out, Ed. We actually find fresh, recent remains of dinosaurs. Hey, wait a second. How can that happen if that was supposed to be 65, 70 million years ago? That's the problem. And you see, and this is what's important, folks. You would expect if there was a recent worldwide flood that we would not only find evidence of a recent worldwide flood, but we'd be able to find at least somewhere on the planet some recent remains even of dinosaurs, right? Man, do we ever, folks. And it's coming out in the last days. Very merciful of God. And the first evidence of recent dinosaur remains, hey, folks, we find recent dinosaur fresh bodies. How do you explain that one? Let's take a look at the actual interview.
A mummified dinosaur that could change a lot about what we know about prehistoric creatures. Tyler Lyson was only 17 when he stumbled upon the dinosaur he named Dakota on his farm out in North Dakota. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What's extraordinary about this is it's a whole dinosaur. There's skin and bones. Right. This is a jackpot.
Exactly. And most of the time, you know, as vertebrate paleontologists, we just have the dinosaur bones to go from. But with this dinosaur, we have, you know, a complete three-dimensional skin envelope around the bone.
Put simply, what happened that enabled, for the first time that we know, for the skin to be preserved like this?
Well, this is
buried right away, but how?
It was buried very rapidly in a flash flood.
One of the most complete dinosaur mummies ever excavated will be unveiled at the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences on September 19th. In 2000, a team of amateur paleontologists excavated the fossil from the Judith River Formation in Malta, Montana. Leonardo, who is named for graffiti scribbled near the dig site, is a mummified duck-billed dinosaur with skin impressions surrounding almost 90% of the body.
I didn't believe it until I saw it. It was a mummy. You could see the skin. From 30 feet away, you could see the skin.
But it's not the skin imprints that make the fossil so special. It's what's inside. Leonardo is the first dinosaur found with an intact digestive tract.
And I had been told they had guts. Now that was too good to believe. So I walk into the little museum, Phillips County Museum, and there were TV lights on the specimen at the time, and you could see the guts.
This technology even helped the team pinpoint the plant eater's last meal, which consisted of chopped up conifer needles and branches, giving scientists a better understanding of the species.
And under a microscope, you can see the jagged edges of the chopped up vegetation here. It's incredibly cool.
Yeah, I agree. That's incredibly cool. Interesting. You find their guts? You find their skin? You find mummified bodies of dinosaurs? Wait a second, Doug. How could that be if they died out millions and millions of years ago, right? Looks to me like it was a recent death or something. I wonder what that might have been. We're just getting started, folks. It gets worse for the evolutionists. The second evidence of recent dinosaur remains from a recent worldwide flood is from fresh dinosaur tissue. How do you get around this one? Folks, we don't just find fresh body parts, we find fresh body tissue. Listen, fresh, soft, pliable body tissue. Don't take my word for it. Here's the scientist who found it. Let's take a look.
The scientific world is still reeling from the discovery of actual Tyrannosaurus rex cells and soft tissue unearthed last week at a Montana excavation site. It's a tremendous find that scientists say could unlock the mysteries of extinction and could one day lead to real-life dinosaur cloning. Well, maybe.
Well, North Carolina State University professor Mary Schweitzer is the leader of the discovery team that found these extraordinary specimens. She joins us now from Raleigh with more. Nice to see you, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Professor, as I understand it, this was sort of an accidental discovery. You had to split one of the bones in half because it was simply too big to get into a helicopter, and in splitting the bone, you suddenly realized you had this soft tissue on your hands. Is that correct?
Well, it wasn't quite that sudden. They had to split the bone in the field, as was reported, and when it got back to the lab and Carrie Ansell began preparing it, she reserved some of the fragments for chemical analyses, and so it was treated slightly different than most dinosaur bone is in the field.
Is that amazing to find this kind of soft tissue in a fossil this old? And what can the soft tissue really tell us?
Well, it's very amazing. It's utterly shocking, actually, because it flies in the face of everything that we understand about how tissues and cells degrade.
And one of the exciting things about this discovery, correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that this stuff was fossilized as it was. If 70 million years old, you don't expect to find soft tissue, do you?
Not at all. No. It was utterly shocking.
So you have to sort of rewrite the book as far as fossilization goes, I assume.
A lot of our science doesn't allow for this. All of the chemistry and all of the molecular breakdown experiments that we've done don't allow for this. So if this material turns out to be actual remnants of the dinosaur, then yes, I think we will have to do some certainly rethinking of some of the basics of the model of fossilization.
You know, Mary, when I was reading about this story, I was amazed that in some of the capillaries, when you went to pull them, they snapped right back. Are you amazed at the quality of these remains?
Absolutely.
70 million years old, huh?
It's just doesn't seem possible. But yes, you can actually take the vessels, and they do have internal components, and so you can take a probe and kind of squeeze those things out into solution, and the vessels are fine. It's just, I can't explain it, to be honest.
Very cool.
Anybody started getting the impression there it's just like, no, just take the blinders off. It wasn't 70 million years ago. It was a recent death. That's why you still find the fresh remains. That's not just pretty cool, folks. Hello, that's pretty hard on the evolution theory that these things died out millions of years ago, right? Fresh, soft, pliable tissue. The evidence to me seems like these things died relatively recently. I wonder what that was. That's right, Doug, it runs with the worldwide flood. But that's not all. This one is a whopper, folks. You're going to see that tissue with your own eyes. The third evidence that recent dinosaur remains are discovered because we've had a recent worldwide flood is they find fresh dinosaur blood cells. How could blood cells survive for supposed millions of years, let alone 65, 70, pick your number? Excuse me, folks, it's a recent worldwide flood. Watch this. This is amazing.
Today's paleontologists are starting to explore radically new clues from dinosaur skeletons.
I was working on the leg bones, and as I worked, I noticed a bunch of stuff. It was like, this bone, is hollow inside. And I was looking at this thing, thinking, this is really interesting.
It was the inside of the T-Rex bone that fascinated Schweitzer, who made thin sections out of it. And in these cross-sections of fossilized bone, she saw something that she and everyone else had thought was impossible. Round structures that looked like red blood cells, dinosaur blood cells.
Inside those channels where the blood vessels would have run were these little round red structures that were all kind of lined up like a train, and they were bright red and translucent. Nobody else had seen anything like that before.
The very idea of blood cells in a 70 million year old bone was more than unconventional. It was radical.
Nobody was imagining that dinosaurs might have had preserved soft tissues.
So along comes Mary Schweitzer, and she's starting to look inside dinosaur bones and has made this startling discovery about the presence of red blood cells. What was your initial reaction to that?
Oh, I think the same reaction as everybody's, that this was totally improbable. She'd perhaps misinterpreted the evidence or was exaggerating the potential for what she was seeing.
So skeptical at first.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you think it didn't occur to anybody?
Because we have this clear understanding that part of all biological cycles involves decay. I mean, nature is set up to break down that material and recycle it. So it's just improbable that those kinds of very delicate structures would survive, particularly for millions of years.
No one had ever identified medullary tissue in a dinosaur bone before. But to be sure, Mary Schweitzer directed her lab assistant to soak the bone sample in an acid solution to reveal its structure so she could study it. What happened next would change the way that scientists thought about fossils forever.
As I was looking in the microscope, the medullary material was no longer hard, and what was left was this curled piece of tissue that I was using forceps to try and flatten out. And when I poked into it, it was spongy. It was flexible and soft tissue.
Flexible tissue from a 68 million year old dinosaur?
Blood vessels.
Here they are.
Transparent, hollow, pliable, flexible, branching blood vessels that contain small round red microstructures floating in the vessels. I said, this is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone. We put it in the solution. We waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Looked again. More blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
From her microscope, Mary hits the jackpot. Pieces of biological history.
Now see, this is really cool. It's what looks like vessels to me, connected together, transparent. And you can see right there, you can see the branch points and stuff.
The Rogers are seeing inside their collection of fossil bone as they've never seen it before. Structures that appear to be the vessels that once carried blood inside a dinosaur's body.
This is hooked together. There's a transparent region.
It's a tube
right
with stuff inside of it.
Branching, hollow, organic material that scientists thought could never be preserved in a dinosaur fossil.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is amazing. And once again, that's really hard on your theory that these things died out millions of years ago. You know, as I was watching that again, the thought occurred to me, it was almost symbolic. You never would have discovered that in these last days if you wouldn't have broken the bone open. And how it is because of the lie of evolution is preventing people from finding out the truth because they convince them there's no need to break this open and find out the true history of life. Very interesting. How do you explain that? How do you explain fresh dinosaur bodies, fresh dinosaur tissue, fresh dinosaur blood cells, except it could only happen in a recent worldwide flood, right? How do you explain that? I mean, it's almost like somebody's trying to cover this up as fast as God brings it up. And that's exactly what this guy says. He admits it. He said the existence of 65 million-year-old DNA is biochemically unthinkable. In other words, the old Earth evolutionary tale, okay, clearly is at odds with fresh dinosaur bone evidence. He said, how embarrassing to the academic establishment. He said, this may be why, listen, direct quote here, this may be why ongoing dinosaur, this ain't the only one, folks, ongoing dinosaur soft tissue discoveries are generally not broadcast through popular media channels. Can I translate that for you? We don't want to get this stuff out. Because just like that, it undermines everything about your theory. And at the exact same time, it gives credence to everything in here. By the way, this isn't all of the stuff. I'm just hitting the highlights.